Okey-dokey. Well, I don't know where everybody is, but y'all are here, so I don't want to hold you up. We'll go ahead and get started. Let me see if I have any announcements for you. Your next quiz is on Tuesday. Come with your phone, your laptop, your tablet, something where you can take the quiz in class, but electronically. So we will do that. And yeah, I think that's it for now. Be thinking about your group project outline, and your short papers are due on Blackboard. In theory, by midnight tonight, but you know me, I'm taking everything with some flexibility. So again, just don't let stuff get too backed up for yourself. It's like my words of wisdom to everyone I've talked to today, honestly, because all my classes are the same. All right, so we do have a couple people online today. Also, I realized like my handwriting sucks, so like I'm gonna type terms instead of writing them, so everyone will be able to see them better. So we had been talking about, so today I should give you a little agenda. We're gonna finish talking about these various disorders that are related, and then we're gonna talk about the type of neglect that we all experience, regardless of our brain status. So go ahead and yeah, there was an event in here earlier, I think, so the chairs are all moved around, and they also got rid of all the rolly chairs, and I don't know why, because they're the most comfy. Anyway, so we're gonna pick back up, and I will put this in much bigger font in a second. Okay. There we go. Something like 36 should be better. Okay. So anosodiaphoria is indifference to illness. So it's not just, we had talked on Tuesday briefly about anosognosia, where they're like unaware of being ill or deny it. This is like they're aware of it, but they just don't care. Which, like, I think for most of us, that seems really foreign, right? Like, I don't know about y'all, but I'm like a teeny bit of a hypochondriac, like always have been, definitely much more so since the pandemic started, or like every time I cough, I'm like, is that COVID, right? And so, yeah, it's sort of a really foreign concept to most of us to be like, oh, I'm really sick, so what, right? But again, things not going quite the way they're supposed to in the brain. Then there's asymbolia, or pain. Nope. Yep. This is the absence of normal reactions to pain. And now in all these cases, we should specify this is not because of problems on their peripheral nerves, right? Or problems with, a spinal cord injury, so they can't feel anything, right? This is specifically pain. And as you can imagine, this can be really, really dangerous, right? So you could harm yourself and kind of like our indifference to illness, be indifferent to your own pain, right? Meanwhile, everyone else around you is like, oh, you're bleeding profusely. You know, whatever, it's fine. Again, like the rest of us are like, what? But again, to these people, freaking out doesn't make sense, right? And so obviously this could be a potential problem evolutionarily if there's not other people around to kind of check them on things. Then there's what's called finger agnosia. Okay, and this is where you're unable to point to your fingers and show them to the examiner. So if they're like, where are your fingers? You're like, they should be like at the bottom of my arms, right? So it's neglect, but just for like where your fingers are. Then we get into some of the more complicated ones. Okay, so balance syndrome. They have a hard time fixating on visual stimuli. So it's like they can kind of like look all over this room, but like their eyes can't stop and focus on one thing. So as a result, they have neglect of objects. Right? It's basically like because they can't focus on them, it's like they don't see them. It's like they don't know they're there. And they also have optic ataxia as part of that as well. All right, then there is contralateral neglect. And this is what we talked about with our case study the other day. This is what we think of when we think of neglect in general. So neglect for visual, auditory, and somatosthetic stimulation on one side of the body or space. So again, we talked about neglect on the left side, not being aware of anything going on around here, right? The geeky video we saw, Kramer coming in with like half his pants off, right? Just not being aware of that side. If patients are able to recover here, and some are, depending on the nature of the damage, they go through what's called alesthesia. Which is where they begin to respond to the neglected stimuli, which is good, right? They're starting to recognize that they respond to them, but they respond to them as if they were on the non-neglected side of the body. So like they might recognize, you know, this mouse is over here, but then they try to use the hand that's not near the mouse to manipulate it.
So beginner respond to the neglected stimuli.
But they respond to them as if they're on the other side of the body. And we talked on Tuesday about simultaneous extinction, right? So this is where people with neglect, if you touch like the non-neglected side, they can tell you're touching them. If you touch the neglected side, as they get better, they can tell you're touching them. But if you were to touch both simultaneously, they'd be like, you're only touching my non-neglected side. So more often than not, if they have this contralateral neglect, it tends to be due to a lesion, some sort of tumor typically. And most often, for whatever reason, we see it on the right side of the brain, the right inferior parietal lobe. So right side parietal lobe would be what I would want you all to know. This includes the right interparietal sulcus and the right angular gyrus. Sometimes you'll see it after lesions to the frontal lobe as well, because of some of the coordination of attention that goes on there. So they have defective sensation or perception. So just a reminder, sensation is actually taking in the stimuli from around us. Perception is our interpretation of it. So like one or the other, or in theory both, because those can be disrupted. And they also have defective attention, right? So it's like they're not sensing the stuff on their neglected side, but it's also partially that they're not paying attention to it. Then there is something called Earthen Syndrome. As you guys can probably guess, things like Balance syndrome and Earthen syndrome are named after the people who discovered them. Oftentimes in science, you find something cool, they name it after you. My high school biology teacher discovered a new species of bush, and his last name was Freelander, so it was something Freelanderous. So, all right, so this is like a combination of a lot of the stuff we've just been talking about. So they have that finger agnosia, where they, don't know where their fingers are, unable to point to their fingers or show them to the examiner if asked. They have essentially the alesthesia in some ways. They have what they call right-left confusion, or like they can sense things, but they don't know which side of the body they're on. Interestingly, they also experience agraphia, which is lack of ability to write. And in some ways that makes sense, right? If your fingers are struggling, right? You don't know where your fingers are in space. You're having left-right difficulties. But the one that's really interesting to me is they also experience acalculia, which is not calculia. Which is an inability to do any sort of math or computational problem. Right, that doesn't match with pretty much anything else, other than like maybe some people using their fingers to do math, right? But I think it happens to be the part of the brain that is affected, and Gerstmann's is also linked to our ability to do this type of computations. So these are from left parietal lobe lesions. So the contralateral neglect we were talking about were right lesions. Gerstmann syndrome is left parietal lobe lesions. Alrighty. Let me do something real quick. See if this will behave for me. I have a couple slides that'll help us look at how you would assess this. Go, perfect. Let's see, PowerPoint will work on this very slow computer. For those of you who got here like right on time or a little after, I actually got here at like almost 1:45 today, and the computer wasn't ready until like right before class started. So I'm glad I got here early, but man, what an experience. Okay. Okay. So these are some of the symptoms, and here's what I was looking for. This is the list of neuropsychological tests you might give these folks. And so what we'll see is that these are somewhat different than other neuropsychological tests we've talked about before, because these are very much designed to look at the things related to parietal lobe damage we've been talking about. So not only neglect, but some of those finger issues, right? And things along those lines. So some somatosensory threshold, 2-point discrimination, it's essentially checking for simultaneous extinction, right? Tactile form recognition. This is a board where there are patterns you have to feel to recognize. And actually, really interestingly, gosh, it was a while ago because it was for Dr. Kingsley's position, who was hired before Dr. Ariel. He had someone come and give a job talk about mental mapping with your fingers. And this is like a whole area of cognitive psychology now. Like we kind of think of visual mental mapping, but there is like tactile mental mapping we study now. Obviously, this is one of the things we look at there. Something as simple as like bisecting a line equally, right? If you have neglect, it's probably going to be more like 3/4, right? There are incomplete figures, closure. So these are like geometric figures that have gaps in them. And the idea is like, can you fill in that this is a triangle? That type of thing. Left, right differentiation. There's a token test to look at speed and language comprehension. And then there's something specifically for apraxia called the Kimura box, which I've never given. So probably pretty cool, but I don't know. Yeah, I never ran into someone with this type of damage. I think I told you in the past, I mostly saw like learning disability, memory issue, and ADHD type assessments. So I've never gotten to do anything on here actually, but I'm sure it would be a challenge, right, to test people who may not know where their fingers are in space. You're trying to get them to do tactile things, right? Alrighty, so that gives us a little more indication of what things look like. And now, like I said, I want to talk about the types of neglect that we all can run into, because that certainly is a possibility. So this is called inattentional blindness or change blindness. And honestly, the easiest way to demonstrate it is with this demonstration. So I'm going to show you this video, and I want you to count, hang on just one sec, let me see if they tell us. Yes, the number of passes you count being made by the team in black. It says just the black team. It's not about race. It's like what color are they wearing. So the team wearing black, count how many times they pass the ball to each other. Okay. And then we'll talk about it afterwards, and I'll get this as big as I can for y'all.
This is an awareness. How many passes does the team black make?
So these guys.
The answer is 19.
They must have counted the one the guy dropped.
Yeah.
All right, so who saw the stormtrooper? All right, most of you, but some of you may have been paying so much attention you missed them. All right, so what the heck does that mean? Well, we have a video that's going to explain this. Typically, this is done with a video of a gorilla instead of the stormtrooper, because people are like vaguely aware of that. That's why I use the stormtrooper one here. So it's a little different. So like if you know a gorilla's coming, it might throw you off. But this one will kind of explain it a little more. Oh, and hang on just a sec. I just realized I need to reshare with sound for my other folks here. There we go.
Most of the time, our vision does a wonderful job, but there's a limit to how much our brains can cope with. So we just pay attention to one thing at a time, and we're blind to the rest.
The brain has a huge amount of information being delivered to it by the eyes. It has to make a decision. It has to decide where to place its attention, what information it should scrutinise, what information it should ignore.
To test just how much we ignore, we've asked Richard Wiseman and the London Towers basketball team to try out an experiment designed by scientists at Harvard University. The idea is simple but silly. We film the team practicing, and then this happens. Surely no one would miss that. We get a group of people together, and Richard briefs them to watch the screen without letting on what they're being tested for.
So this is an experiment. It's a battle of the sexes, men against women. There'll be a difference, but I'm not going to say which way round it's going to be. And it's just a simple observation test. All you need to do is you'll see there are 3 guys in yellow here, and they have a basketball. And it's your job to count the number of times they throw the basketball to each other. Now, to make things slightly harder, there's also 3 guys in blue tracksuits. But you ignore them, ignore their basketball, and just concentrate on this one. So if we can run the tape. Okay, so that's number 1.
Crucially, the volunteers are told to count how many times the yellow team passes the ball. But will that be enough to make them miss the gorilla? So did they see anything?
Okay, if we can stop the tape there for the moment. So how many basketball throws? 20? Any more others? 21? Okay. Okay, be honest here. Anybody notice anything a little bit unusual? Be honest. Okay, it's just about 4 or 5 of you. Excellent. The rest of you not notice anything strange, honest? Okay. Right. For you guys, enjoy this moment. When the first time I saw this, it completely threw me. Now I want you to watch the tape again, but this time just watch it as you would a normal piece of television. No counting the basketball, anything like that. If we can have the tape.
Time to show them what they missed.
Here he comes.
No way. That didn't happen.
Because they were all concentrating on counting, their brains just didn't register the gorilla.
I'm absolutely shocked. I can't believe it. I was so proud of myself as well because I got all 20. And I was so busy concentrating on it that I didn't know.
I'm kind of embarrassed. I thought I'd spot a monkey walking across the middle of the screen.
I was completely astounded. It was just kind of like when he did the kind of like that. I was just absolutely amazed. I was gobsmacked. I'd say. It's kind of, I can't believe, and saying they might have probably switched the video or something like that. I can't believe that you could miss something that obvious.
That's really bizarre. It's freaked me out a bit.
Okay, so that gives you the idea of what they're trying to get at here, which is we only have so much capacity for our attention. If we're really concentrating on something, we might miss other things. This is the same reason why if you're like trying to follow directions and you're trying to like figure out where to turn or figure out where the house is you're going to, you'll turn on the radio, right? It feels really weird. Like, why am I doing that? But it's just so that you can focus more on that one thing, right? This is also why, contrary to the hopes and dreams of many students who have done 480 studies on this, listening to music while studying is actually not as helpful as listening to it quiet for the vast majority of people. There may be exceptions for people who have attentional disorders that helps them focus. But yeah, typically studying in quiet is more effective. So this is a type of neglect that we all could experience, right? And it's called inattentional blindness or change blindness. And so it's failure to detect changes in the presence of objects in the screen, like the gorilla or the stormtrooper, right? Or in the identity or objects or a person or the location. So I have one of my favorite videos related to this that I'm going to show you all next, where they had a lot of fun with this. Yeah, there's a couple different ones actually that I'll show. This one is, what? BBC, how dare you? Okay, we'll show this one, that's fine. So this is a Nova video, and then we have another one that I'll show as well.
You are about to take part in a quick experiment. Take a look at this. Okay, now, did you happen to notice anything odd? Watch again. See any changes? Don't worry if you didn't see that it's two different men. It means your brain is doing exactly what it should be. It's focusing on the meaning of the scene rather than on the irrelevant details. Imagine how much energy and brain mass it would take for us to remember every single person, place, or thing we encountered. The things that matter, a conversation with a coworker, your child's first step, would be drowned by a deluge of information. So when there are minor changes to the world around us, we often don't pick up on them. There are two similar phenomena at work.
Inattentional blindness is the failure to notice something that's fully obvious right there in front of you when your attention is engaged on something or someone else. Change blindness is a failure to notice a difference between what's there right now and what was there a moment ago.
Scientists such as Daniel Simons from the University of Illinois have spent years devising experiments testing just how perceptive and unperceptive humans actually are.
So we feel like we're aware of everything, that we're taking in all of the details, and that if something important happens, we'll automatically notice it. It'll capture our attention. The reality is that we often don't notice unexpected things because we're aware of far less of our world than we think we are.
So how much or how little are we actually aware of? We decided to recreate one of Simon's most famous experiments to see for ourselves. Here's the setup.
Our senior series producer, Vin, poses as a lost pedestrian and asks a passerby for directions.
Excuse me, I'm looking for the skyline.
Then, we break the two up, walking through them holding a large sheet of wood. Now watch as I replace Vin. You might think people would notice the switch, but almost half the time, they didn't. Of course, that means more than half the time they did. We only tried the experiment 9 times, and by no means was it good science, but we were surprised 4 people didn't notice the switch. In Simon's original experiment, 7 out of 15 people didn't either. So what determines whether or not you can figure out the switch?
When you look at another person, you encode what's relevant for what you're doing right then, in that case, giving directions, and you don't pay attention to the details that are irrelevant, say what color their shirt is or exactly how tall they are. As long as you are able to make sense of the meaning of the scene and roughly the main categories of that person, say their height, their age, what race they are, what sex they are, as long as those important things don't change, the meaning of the scene really hasn't changed and you're not going to notice that anything's different.
Scientists have documented inattentional and change blindness since the 1970s, and while they allow you to focus your attention, this failure to see every detail can prove costly. Drivers often cause accidents because they overlook quick changes to their environments, such as pedestrians or cyclists. Faulty memories can wreak havoc during eyewitness testimony.
The goal of vision isn't to build a photograph or a complete model of the world in your mind. The goal of vision is to make sense of the meaning of the world around you. Being aware of our limitations can help us adapt and compensate for them, allowing us to do things that prevent the really negative consequences that can happen due to failures of awareness.
For example, Simons thinks that people might be willing to put away their cell phone when driving if they just understood the limits to their attention. Juries might realize that eyewitness testimony is far from ideal. And the next time you and a friend are fighting about the details of a past event, it's likely you're both wrong. Now that's something to remember.
Okay, I believe I have one more video. Yep. And it's another example of this person swap. So, drag this out the way there, quickly.
Writing's not that easy, but Grammarly can help. This sentence is grammatically correct.
You see that girl is much taller than the first girl, but because they're focusing on the map, they don't pay attention. Yeah, the one that got taken down, I'm super bummed about because it's one of my favorite videos ever. They had a guy who was like an actor do this, and you know, again, most people didn't notice, some did, and they're like, wait a minute. My favorite version of it is at one point the board that went between them was a giant picture of the first guy. That people like still didn't necessarily notice. So that's change blindness, and that's something that we all technically can run into. Let's see, there's one more here where they do it as part of a like clear psych study. No, this is the one that is unavailable. Bummer. Okay, but where they it's like you come to check in for the study when there's a big counter, and the person who like initially checks you in goes, oh wait, I have to get something up here, and then like someone else stands up. And like it tends to work there too. So obviously something that feels really weird, right? Like, what do you mean we all have that? But we do. So have you ever experienced something like this? I mean, these are sort of silly experiments, but where like you haven't realized something changed, and you like takes you a while, and then you're like, whoa, how did I not notice that? Yes, yes. Yeah, I remember one time I got a haircut, and everyone always knows when I get a haircut because my hairstylist blows it out straight, and I rarely do that myself, so it's pretty obvious. Like even Dr. Jackson is like, you got a haircut today. Yes, I did. But a friend of mine's husband was, it's much shorter. And I was like, just a little sniff, like, so sometimes we like overestimate when we know there is a difference. Yeah, things like changing out furniture, right? People might not notice that. Changing pictures, things along those lines. If it's jarring enough, we'll certainly notice. Like, I haven't been in Blocker, but from what I've heard, what they did in the hallways is like really obvious. So they took down all the bulletin boards and put up giant pictures of like, it was supposed to be our students, but some of the pictures are like not our students. So good job. They called it the Blocker Hall Beautification Project. I love that. I'm glad we're spending money on that. So yeah, obviously, this is something we all can run into, right? And so it can make all of us kind of second guess ourselves and really realize that as weird as neglect in general feels like it is not actually like that outside the realm of what we can experience in our day-to-day lives, right? This is also why like studying with the TV on can be problematic, right? It annoys my husband to no end because he's pretty good at processing two things at once, but if he starts talking to me while we're watching something, I always pause it. And he's like, I don't have to talk. I was like, no, I want you to talk. That's why I paused it. I'm just trying to pay attention, right? So that's a big piece of it as well. All right, this also has to do with things like talking or texting while driving, which you heard in one of the videos. So what do you think the issues are that arise there?
The road and you could kill someone back.
Right.
Texting is more obvious to talking. Looking at the phone.
Right.
But even talking with their pinching on there. Like, I'm sure, like, if anyone's ever read a book and when they finish the book, close the book and realize you're in space, like you're actually in like a physical space, like you're in kind of the movie in your head. You do the same thing in front of the phone. You kind of visualize and imagine things that you're talking about. And that does take away from the right.
Yeah. It just, for some reason, what you just said about the book made me think of, I don't remember if this was like over holiday break or one of the times our daughter was sick, might have been the latter. And we've been like taking care of her. And, when you're just spending all your time and attention doing that, can be like really mentally exhausting as well. Like potty training is really mentally exhausting if you do certain methods because you just literally watch them the whole time. The method we use until they start peeing and then you run them to the potty. And so like your mind is just dead after that, right? So we were just like both taking a minute to be on like our Instagram or games on our phones. And we looked up and my daughter had gotten out some of my nail polish, opened it. We didn't even know she had the dexterity to do that, and like decorated her new comforter for her bed. And so again, it was like happening right in front of us. We should have been able to see it, right? But because we were looking down, totally missed it. The other story I like to tell is my cognitive psych professor in college did a lot of cool research. So like did some stuff for Ford Motor Company about like hands-free devices. This was the early 2000s when those weren't like, not every car had sync or whatever, right? And what she found is even if you're using a hands-free device, people don't focus on the road while they're talking. And she came home after one day of like working on the data all day, and like someone had literally crashed in the side of her apartment building because they've been talking on the phone and driving, right? I remember when cell phones really first started to get popular, there was someone who rear-ended my grandparents who just like didn't stop at all, like didn't try to slow down or stop at all at a stoplight because they were on their phone. And like when they got out to like go see if they were still on their phone, right? And it can be other things as well. Like one of my favorite stories from my internship year, I had like great people with me. We supported each other. We got through, and like they're like great characters as well. And Brandon was great. So all of us were women except for Brandon. And Brandon was like 6'2". And the hilarious thing about Brandon is he's the brunt of his family. All his brothers are taller than he is. And he was like, all of us were kind of from all over, but he was a good old Southern boy. And so he told us this story that he had gone to Crystal Burger, which is how you have to say it if you're thinking Brandon in your head. And he was driving into his apartment complex, and it was one of those where it had the gate. And he looked down at his burger, went to take a bite, and said to himself, "That's a good burger." And he just drove right through the gate because he didn't notice like the person in front of him had like long gone. And the best part about it was the head of his apartment, like his landlord, was standing right there when he did it. And so same thing as the phone. He could, I just went right over there with my burger and said, "Sorry about that. It's a good burger."
Have you ever been like holding your phone and doing something, and then you go to like throw your phone in there and you definitely throw
Yeah, yeah. Well, and the phones are kind of funny now anyway, right? Because like they're such a part of us that there are times where I'm like, "Where's my phone?" And I'm like literally holding it and I don't realize it. Yeah. Anyone else get phantom vibrations when you don't have your phone on? Yeah, it's almost like phantom limb or something.
I saw a man on the beach eating a sandwich and throwing rocks. And he threw a sandwich in the
Oh
ocean and threw a
no!
rock.
Oh no! I'm sure the sequels of it.
I watched him stiffen. I said nothing.
Yeah, so this could happen to the best of us, right? This could happen to any of us. Yeah.
Could this also be like when you are so focused on something? Like, example, when I was in high school, I was a camp counselor up in the mountains, and one weekend, all the counselors were like riding like mini bikes and stuff. And one girl fell and she was unconscious. And so, and we're in the middle of nowhere. So I was like keeping her still and talking to her for like an hour and a half before they finally got there to the hospital. And I had been kneeling down, and literally once they took her, I realized I had lost all feeling.
Oh
in my
yeah.
legs.
Yep.
Like I couldn't even stand up.
Especially when we're in the moment like that, like we can have no idea. Like there are cases like that where the person themselves is injured and doesn't realize it until the other person knows helped because they're just so focused on helping that person. Yeah. And part of that survival instinct, right? And part of that is because humans are herd animals or pack animals, right? We like to be around other people. Being social is part of how we survive. So that's a piece of it as well. Yeah, we've talked a little bit about this, and I know those of you who are in my scientific literacy course have seen this already, but this made me think of this. So Mythbusters did one about driving and texting, or I think it was just talking on the phone. This was before like driving and texting was even a thing, and compared it to drunk driving. We can do a quick little viewing of this. Oh, that's the change in this one. Yeah. Gotta pop this down. The other fun one, although it's much longer.
You know the feeling when you realize—
You can't really watch it during class, but is the Try Guys did this, where they drove drunk, high, and while texting. And like the texting was like the worst for some of them.
you've bought things you'll never use?
Okay, we'll let the ad talk to itself for a second. You can just magically sell it. Just that, but I'm sure you don't have to pay any fees for.
Next myth has them hitting the road. Come on, admit it. You know you do it. Talk on the cell phone while driving. And deep down, you know it's dangerous. But is it as dangerous as that other driving taboo?
Here comes another one. The myth is that it is just as dangerous to drive while talking on a cell phone as it is while driving drunk.
Well, obviously, you know, while you're dialing, your eyes are not on the road, but what we really need to pinpoint is whether the conversation itself is dangerous.
Yes.
Yeah, people seem to be under the impression that if you're at a stoplight, it might be okay to dial because you're not moving, but then it's okay to talk once you actually get moving. And that's the key thing about this myth. Is it, in fact, safe to talk on a cell phone while you're driving?
That's what we're going to test.
Just like full disclosure, as someone who's almost hit someone in front of me because I was using my cell phone at a light, like, yeah, it doesn't actually work, right?
They're off to the Russell Racing School at Inferior Raceway in Napa, California.
The plan we've got today is that both Carrie and I are the test subjects. We're actually going to do the Russell Racing School course here. They've got several different driving skills to test on us.
First, they'll each run a control lap, sober and cell phone free, to get acquainted with the course. Then they'll navigate the course again, only this time while Jamie distracts them with a cell phone call.
What? I can't hear that.
Finally, they'll knock back a few cold ones, take a police-administered breathalyzer test, and then climb back behind the wheel for their last lap.
Oh, man.
This is a tough one because I do notice on occasion talking on a cell phone that it's easy to zone out. Whether that's equivalent to driving while
All right, so they're taking way too long, but essentially they find out, I believe in this case it was actually worse than driving drunk. It is partially because we've been so trained to know that drunk driving is bad, that if we are under the influence of driving, we're super cautious in a lot of cases, right? Unless we're super gone, and then, that's when we unfortunately get drunk driving accidents, right? Yeah.
Do you think having a conversation with a passenger in the car is similarly dangerous?
That's a really good question. I don't think it's as dangerous, and I'm not sure why. I think part of it is, so we talked a lot about mental mapping and whatnot in here, right? And how, like, if I were to think about like walking out of the library, I could like consciously do that, right? And it would take me longer to think about that than it would take me to think about like walking to the bathroom right over here, right? And so I'm guessing, although I'm not a cognitive psychologist, so it could be totally a wrong hypothesis, that there's something about like knowing the person is further away that sort of like mentally takes this more away from the conversation. But I also know that if you're really into that conversation and you're turning to look at that person, or your kiddo's distracting you in the back seat, right, or your dog, right? This is, in addition to the dog safety, a big reason why people say to like restrain your dog in the car so they don't distract you, right? Then yeah, it can be super dangerous, obviously. So yeah, I remember as a new mom, like we only had one mirror at first for our car. And so like I was driving somewhere with my daughter by myself and I couldn't see her. And I just like the whole time I was like, is she okay? It's like I have postpartum anxiety, so that's part of it, but like all parents get this a little bit. And so that just distracts you obviously the whole time. Yeah. So what is attention in general? What do y'all think? And if you're following along in the SGA, this is start a question 2.
Like choosing to attend to certain things.
Exactly. Yeah, I really like the way Coleman Wishaw described it as a mental spotlight, right? It's like what you're choosing to or what draws your attention, right? Sometimes it's not that we choose, it's just something is so obvious, like you see something on fire or something like that, but that pulls you there, right? Yeah, it's a selective awareness of part of the environment. So there are definitely not conscious parts of attention. We've talked about some of those in this class already. Things like blind sight, right? And blind touch. But even things like just our general nonverbal processing, it's not having to consciously stop and go, no, I'm going to process this nonverbal information, right? Like our brain does a lot of this automatically. So consciousness is basically awareness. And then we can get kind of meta and say consciousness is awareness of awareness. Psychology likes to do a lot of stuff like that, right? Like metacognition is thinking about thinking, and you like get too far down that rabbit hole, you're like, what even am I experiencing right now? I don't know, right? And it's sort of interesting to think about like the human brain studying itself. Right, and this is part of where that starts to come into being. Yeah,
literally last night, in like doing research and writing a paper, and I told my best friend, I was like, it's really weird, like reading about like a dysfunctional brain and making you aware of how your brain is dysfunctional, right. And like it's just like the spiral.
Yep. Yeah, I think that's something that I should have warned you all about, but in particular, we see more in abnormal psych. Which we're not calling adult psychopathology here, which I love. Takes away some of the stigma of calling people with disorders abnormal. But we have a tendency to like believe everything we read like is us, right? Like, it's like, oh, I have that and I have that. I was convinced in like grad school when I took my adult psychopathology class that I had borderline personality disorder. I did not have borderline personality disorder. Now that I know more about it, I know I clearly don't have it. But I was like, I have some of these symptoms, you know, so that could happen.
I'm in child psychopathology, and that's something that it's almost the inverse, right? That a lot of people in my class seem to see a lot of these symptoms in themselves and knowing like, oh, I don't have ADHD, so ADHD isn't real.
Oh, wow.
Like that's been a lot of the conclusions that some people have been jumping to about if I experience these symptoms and I don't have this disorder, then obviously this disorder, this disorder is over diagnosed or is not real or it's hysteria or something.
Interesting.
It's been a time.
I can imagine, yeah, especially you being a psychiatrist, being like, what, where am I? Yeah, I think that we kind of go on both sides of the spectrum with that, right? So there are times where we tend to like believe there are crazy people all around us and within ourselves, right? And then there are times where we're like, that can't really be a thing. That sounds too strange, right? And even again, like in this class, I feel like sometimes when I'm trying to explain some of this, you know, again, I've never experienced it. Some of it I've never even assessed someone who has it, right? So like trying to explain it to you all can feel like you're probably like, she made this up. Like that doesn't sound like a thing, right? But yeah, these are true experiences that people have. And it's just when the brain has some sort of injury or miswiring, and it just doesn't function in the way we expect it to. And sometimes like synesthesia, right, it seems like it's actually kind of beneficial and cool. And other times it's obviously really detrimental, as we've seen with some of our really sad case studies, right? And obviously like Hollywood loves to play with this too. So if anyone's ever seen the movie Phenomenon with John Travolta, like he like has these powers he gets, and it's because he has a brain tumor. Like it doesn't make any sense logically, but like you find out at the end of the movie, sorry, spoiler for like a 30-year-old movie, that he has a brain tumor, and that's why he was like seeing lights and things. Right, yeah. Powers because of drugs, or the one with Scarlett Johansson, where she's using more than 10% of her brain. So like, no, that's not any of this works. Like we're always using all of our brain. It just parts might be more active than others at a given time, right? So yeah, I think that's part of it too, right? That Hollywood kind of gives us these misconceptions about what these things are, and also about how rare or not they are, right? I think in some cases they make things that are pretty common seem just, again, like hysteria or wild, like depression, right? Oh my gosh, can you believe how sad this person is? Yeah, like 25% of people experience that, right?
It's also like consider through the early 2000s, especially when it feels like now everyone you know has someone in everything you have to know, right?
Oh yeah.
And so you're starting to see like, well, my parents were like, well, I don't know, when I was growing up, and I'm like, yeah, because they died.
Right.
So it's like it's survivorship bias. People are starting to survive these things now. People are starting to talk about these things now. It also happens with like LGBTQ identities. Well, if everything we have gay, kind of, we're all just talking about it now.
Yeah, I think that that's a big part of it too. So I remember, you know, part of what happens when you get into your 20s and 30s is your friends start trying to have babies, and 1 in 3 people who have been pregnant, or no, it's 1 in 3 pregnancies ends in a miscarriage. But like no one usually talks about it. And so I was like talking to my mom one day about, well, my friend had a miscarriage. She's like, is there something in the water down there? I feel like a lot of your friends have. I'm like, 1 in 3 pregnancies, but like literally no one talked about it. And she was right. I think I believe that. Oh. Yeah, it's just, it's so painful, especially if you wanted to be pregnant, right? Because it's like a loss of what you thought was going to be. And just like the way our medical system is set up is really problematic for us. I know this is a tangent, but it's an example of how we don't pay attention to things, right? Like the fact that they tell you like, don't tell anyone until you're 12 weeks along, so it's, in case anything happens. Well, that means it's like,
Now that's serious because a woman just went to prison for having a I just think she was
conservative
yeah, like it
states.
wasn't the fault of it. Because like
Yeah.
I was like having to terrifying like getting inside of it. It's just so scary. Like it's one of the one that happens
Right. Yeah, I have a friend who had a stillbirth here, which is where you're far enough along you have to actually deliver, which you can imagine is even extra heartbreaking. You go through the whole delivery process and you don't have a live baby afterwards. And she got in the mail like paperwork she had to fill out essentially along those lines. Like, did you kill your child? And she was like, obviously already devastated. Luckily called her doctor and they were like, oh my God, you weren't supposed to get that. Like, send it to us. We're supposed to process that. And clearly you didn't, right? But yeah, so there's a lot of things that we think are rare that are not, or at least we experience. There's like a continuum, right? We tend to think of things as like this or not, neglect or not, right? But in fact, there's this whole continuum. Oliver Sacks talked about that when we talked about face blindness, right? For some agnosia. Like there's probably people who are like, those people you know who like know someone the second time they see them, right, ever. And then there's people like me who like, it takes me like half the semester to figure out people's names. The maths are not helping and being online is not helping, right? But yeah, that it can take a while for that. I think that there's also sometimes the opposite effect. So like Hollywood really wants you to believe that like there's a lot of people running around with dissociative identity disorder or multiple personality disorder, and it's super rare, right? But it makes some really compelling movies, right? So things like Split and Three Faces of Eve, if we're going to old school, or Sybil. Yeah.
I also think that, like, because of the internet, the world is definitely changing.
Mhm,
And so even though there are very few people with DID, we're starting to learn more about those people, and like we are able to create relationships with people in situations that we otherwise would not. And so, you know, whereas we might only know like the people in our town 100 years ago, now I can see people all over the country, and so like it feels like there are more people with DID because we're able to learn more about people in general.
Yeah, I think that Miranda brings up a really good point. So things like social media, just websites in general can bring us closer. There's actually studies that show that like engaging, especially in like support groups on social media, like Facebook groups, and or apparently whatever they're going to rename themselves to make everything magically better. I don't know if you guys have heard that, but Facebook is going to rename themselves because that's how they're going to solve their problems. But like people in those groups, you know, for people with depression, it actually is super beneficial. They feel supported. They feel like, oh, I found other people who are like me. And again, they might not be able to find it in that area.
The thing about Reddit, every single community is kind of like that small group. So like Reddit is very there's a homepage, but then every single thing you get is from a different subreddit. And so like there have been terrorists on Reddit. They're called misogyny terrorists. And so people like the Elliot Logic, he had the Isla Vista shooting a couple of years ago because he was an incel and was on Reddit talking to other men.
I remember that.
About
Yeah.
how, you know, his manifesto and whatever. And several killings have been done in his name since he died through that community.
So yeah, this can obviously go either direction. It could be super great or it could be super not. And that's true for how we think about people with these types of disorders and dysfunctions as well, right? Knowledge can be fantastic. It can mean they find other people like them. It can mean sometimes they figure out there's a name for what they have, right? And it can also sometimes backfire and just become like the butt of jokes, which like I never think that mental illness should be like the source of a joke, right? It's really problematic. So, all right, I got a little tangential today, so thanks for hanging in there with me. I'm gonna go ahead and let you out a few minutes early today. And then again, Tuesday you have your next quiz. Tonight on Blackboard, paper due. And we're going to start talking about actually some of the disorders we were talking about in passing today. So some of the neurological disorders on Tuesday. All right, thanks for tuning in on Zoom, Brittany and Amanda. Have a good day.